Hi everybody, thanks for taking the time out of your lunch break to come and sit in on this webinar today. My name's Dayne Hodgson. I'm a director, co-founder of Red Knight Consultancy Limited. Our main aim is to support high-tech startups and SMEs with applying for grant funding to help the development of their innovative products, processes and services. Our main service areas include bid writing, retained consultancy, application reviews, doing a bit of staff development training, helping with project management for projects which are up and running, and also helping people with access to R&D tax relief. That's the sales pitch over with. The reason why I'm here today, or been asked to talk today, is because as a kind of byproduct of what we do, we've been applying for tenders on behalf of Red Knight, which we have been quite successful with. And so I'm just here really to share some of those experiences with you today, and hopefully to help you learn a few things and help you guys improve on your tender writing, and hopefully get some more external funding into Welsh business. In terms of the learning outcomes, what I'm hoping you're going to take away from today is what can be done before you start writing the tender. So getting those kind of pre-writing tips in place to try and help make things more efficient for yourselves. How to evaluate if an opportunity is right for your company, and understanding the fact that everything isn't always an opportunity. Hopefully you're going to develop some practical skills to enhance your tender writing processes, with the aim of optimizing your chances for success through effective planning and reviewing. So to start with, let's look at some of the things that you can do before you actually start writing your tender. So it's really important before you start applying, I think, to outline your strategic goals. Before starting your procurement journey, really decide on what it is that you want to achieve. What sort of contracts are you looking to win? What are the value of those contracts? And what are you able to actually deliver? Using that outline, it will then be much easier to plot that path to success, as you'll be able to really target specific clients and those opportunities that align with the strategic goals of your organization. This was something that we kind of found out the hard way at Red Knight, because when we started the business back in 2015, my business partner's expertise, or one part of his expertise, was with project evaluations and doing a lot of evaluations for the European Commission and a range of other funding bodies. And we spent quite a significant amount of time with applying for tenders to conduct evaluations for Welsh European Funding Office, Welsh Government, other projects, structural fund projects which needed evaluations. And we really struggled with that. We weren't successful at all. And what we soon realized was that it wasn't actually in line with what we wanted to do as a business anyway. So we soon moved from applying for those tenders and really concentrating more on what we actually wanted to do. And that was on the bid writing and on supporting people with applying for funding. And it was when we sort of made that realization that actually we started to be a lot more successful with our tenders. It's really important to have, or try and have, as much in place, I think, to try and make the process as simple and as efficient as possible. So successful bidding obviously requires successful planning, getting your house in order first. So there are a lot of companies out there who will operate a reactive bidding model, as opposed to carefully planned and considered bidding model. And it's those people who operate a reactive model who source the opportunities first and then frantically try and bring all of their resources together in order to actually develop the bid and get it in on time. But obviously that isn't always the most productive way of doing things. It's really difficult because you don't always get good initial kind of heads up on when things are coming through the pipeline. But if you can get signed up to all of the different kind of tender platforms, obviously in Wales, Sell to Wales is the main one, but there are other ones in Scotland and England that you can, and Ireland, that you can get signed up to. European Commission's got one as well, and really give yourself the best opportunity of being at those opportunities when they come available. And it's imperative to put all of your ducks in a row and source all of the necessary bidding resources that you will require before you start sourcing opportunities. And we'll talk a bit more about what those resources are a little bit later on. Know what you're writing about. So this sounds quite obvious, but before you actually put your pen to paper, make sure that you can actually fulfill the tender criteria set out in the specification. And this will help you avoid wasting time. So things you can consider is, do you meet the minimum financial criteria? Can you feasibly meet the requirements of the buyer? Do you have the required accreditations and memberships if they are needed? Do you possess the relevant experience to undertake the contract? And then from that point, you can make a sort of go or no-go decision if you meet the, all of the criteria, which will ultimately decide if you're successful or unsuccessful with the tender. And I make the point quite a few times over the next half an hour or so that reading the tender documentation is really absolutely pivotal before you actually start putting pen to paper. Committing dedicated resources to the process is really key if you can, and obviously this is easier if you're a larger SME or even a larger business from there. If you're a startup, 1 or 2 people, it would be quite difficult. But when tendering for opportunities, I find it's important to have a focal point in your organization or a single person who's responsible for the bidding process. Essentially, the reason behind that is accountability, and you've got that person then driving the process. If an individual or specific team feel responsible for the success of a bid, then it's likely they'll take pride in their work and ultimately try and improve the process that you've got in-house and hopefully write more successful bids. When I work with clients developing grant applications, we always try and insist on having a specific person within the business that we can work with on developing the bid, and having that buy-in from the client often results in a much more fluid and effective process and successful applications at the end of the day, which is what we all actually want. Most of you as small businesses will probably understand who your ideal client profile is in terms of who they would be if you were selling services. And it's important to know who you'd want to work for in terms of when you're tendering as well. So who is actually issuing the tender? It's important to get a feel for the companies that you'd be happy to work for, but also the companies or the public organizations that you might not actually want to work for. And do remember, as I said at the beginning, every opportunity isn't an opportunity, and it is okay to say no from time to time. And then once you've identified companies on both lists, you can then start targeting the preferred companies that you'd want to actually provide your services to. And then that will align yourself, more strategically with their goals and objectives. I think for us, we see quite a lot of opportunities come through from both private and public sector entities. For us as a company, it's typically more effective when we work with private companies, because what we find is the turnaround time on making decisions is quite quicker, and they've got a very, very clear idea on what they want to do, which makes our life a lot easier. But we also come across quite a few opportunities through the public sector, through universities, for example. And what I find with universities, although we do support them, I find it a lot harder to work with universities at times because there's so much more process to the actual administration side of things rather than the actual just bid writing and developing the bid. So for me personally, I would much prefer to work with private entities rather than actual universities, just for those reasons. Being realistic is also really important. I think only apply for opportunities that you know you can afford to deliver. So for example, if one of the tenders that you're looking at has got a ceiling price, say for example, £75,000, but you know it was going to cost you £100,000 to actually deliver that contract, then you've got to ask yourself the question, is that even an opportunity? Because if you sign the contract and you promise to deliver the work, then obviously you've got a contractual obligation to then go ahead and deliver that work, which could lead to some serious financial losses for yourselves. So it's always important to carry out cost analysis and include income projections with all of your bids. And by income projections, I mean, how is the tender structured in terms of that cash flow coming into your business? Is the tender going to be you deliver the job and you get paid at the end? Or if it's a 12-month contract, is there quarterly milestone payments? Having all of those understood before you actually apply is obviously very important. We're looking at one at the moment at Red Knight, and the total contract value is £10,000, and we're kind of just having an internal review and discussion at the moment, trying to work out how much time that tender would actually take to deliver, and how many days we'd have to commit, and whether or not the value of that contract is actually sufficient enough to cover the work that we'd need to put in to deliver that contract. Express interest as soon as possible. I'd always try and do this, and it links back to what I was saying earlier. If you can get somebody in your organization to stay on top of opportunities, or if that is indeed you yourself, try and express an interest in the bid as soon as possible, because obviously if you leave it until just a few days before, then it's only going to lead to increased pressure and stress, which isn't going to lead to a very effective tender submission. And as soon as you've identified that opportunity, get that documentation downloaded, and start reading it as soon as possible, because that is key to a lot of these tenders, is reading the full document, the ITT that they send out with it. And remember as well, once you've got that documentation and you've read it, don't be afraid to engage with the contractor as well. There's always means of dropping them questions through a messaging facility or a direct email address. And I often find that if you engage with them as well, and they know about you, I don't know if this is just coincidence, but with the ones that I've engaged with and asked questions, we've typically gone on to be successful with those bids. I'm not sure if that's just luck or coincidence, but always make the most. If you're not sure about anything, get in touch with them and find out for certain. And don't just dive into the writing. So as I mentioned, the most exhaustive and yet critical part of the process is actually reading the tender documentation in full. I think it's quite easy to quickly jump in and start answering some of the questions before fully reading everything, and obviously that can lead to missed requirements and drafting responses that don't actually answer what the contractor is looking for. When writing a tender for the first time, you can also, especially if you're in a very small team, or even a sole trader, you can end up in what we call an echo chamber, where you start writing responses of what you kind of think sounds good, and it ends up sounding more like a marketing leaflet or a brochure than actually a tender response, which is answering a very discrete set of questions, which is what the bidder is actually, or what the contractor is actually looking for. And obviously, if you take that approach, then more often than not, you're going to score pretty poorly. The devil is in the detail. So with part of that documentation, there'll be loads of other documents within it. Often you'll get the framework agreement, the actual contract that you need to sign, the ITT document, which is where the questions will be. You'll also get the evaluation criteria and how the tender is going to be scored when it goes to the evaluators. So it's really, really critical to go through all of that. Especially with the contractual clauses, because there's typically stuff which is hidden deep into that documentation, which you might need to be aware of. A couple of things which stand out for me when I was pulling the slides together was with one contract we won, it was to be on a framework of bid writers for a Welsh government wholly owned subsidiary. And one of the clauses in the contract meant that if we were successful with any of the applications we supported them with, we were not able to promote those case studies. Now, for us, as a bid writing agency, promoting successful case studies is paramount to all of our marketing and advertising. So not being able to do that was a big blow. The other one that I always come up against when we apply or submit tenders is payment terms. We try to push for a 14-day payment turn on our standard invoices to clients, but usually with tenders you're looking at 30 or maybe 60 days, and understanding what the exact payment terms are, obviously for any business, is absolutely critical. So that's kind of summarizing what can be done pre-writing the tender response. We'll now move into looking at how to enhance the tender writing process. So planning your tender submission in detail. So every application or every story in this case has a captivating beginning, compelling middle, and a gratifying end. And your tender submission should follow the exact same writing process. So although there might be parts of the tender which you're not really sure about, or you've got less interest in, for example, if you're running a techie business, you're probably a lot more interested in the techie side of things than you are in the how are you going to report your finances. But nevertheless, every part of the tender response has to be given the same attention to ensure you get those high scores throughout. This process will be successful if you plan ahead and lay out the submission section by section in detail before you start writing. And one of the approaches I like to take with that is actually creating a skeleton plan of the application before actually going into writing the details. So that could be beginning with just crafting the headlines within the document, and then putting some bullet points below those headlines, and then building upon those bullet points with fully formed paragraphs, and then turning it into the actual tender document. So we'll now look at different parts of a tender, and it was quite difficult preparing these slides because every tender can be different, but there are some common parts to tenders which we'll look through now. So you've got typically pre-qualification questionnaires, PQQs, which are sometimes referred to as selection questionnaires. They're not always required, but more often than not they are, because they act as the kind of first stage of selection, and usually ask questions regarding what you've done previously and how your experiences make you suitable for delivering the contract. They typically involve completing very basic company information, registration numbers, that you haven't breached any legislation in the past, your technical and professional ability, any declarations, and also contact details. And what you can do is to try and save yourself a bit of time downstream is once you've done this once for one tender, just keep everything saved and remember where you saved it. Try and give your organization structure to this process so you can quickly go and find information, just to save you typing up the same stuff continuously for different tenders. And again, PQQs can differ from one another, so always check the guidance documentation in case they're looking for anything specific. Within that PQQ, it can sometimes ask for case studies. It typically asks you to describe 2 or 3 contracts of similar nature that you've completed in the past or currently undertaking. There's typically a time span, I find, of within the past 5 years. Interestingly, I think some people get put off because they think, well, my business hasn't won any tenders in the past, and it kind of impacts on that track record that you need to demonstrate. But what I found with a few other people and talking to other tenderers is that they've actually accepted experiences from outside of the actual setup of the business. So if you as a person have delivered some contract work, maybe for a different organization, if you work for somebody else or personally as a self-employed person, then sometimes they will accept those case studies. And again, it kind of boils back to that point I made about getting in touch with the buyer and asking those questions just to see what they would happily accept or not. And remember, the case studies are an opportunity for you to sell yourself and to demonstrate your previous successes and what you've helped other people achieve, and how you can bring those successes to the person issuing this contract. Remember, typically, most questions will have some kind of word count. I've got 500 words here. I might have been a bit too optimistic with that. I think tenders can typically range between 200 and 500 words, if they have a word count, that is. Most of them do, from my experience. And typically within case studies, you'd be looking at things. So what is this? Ask yourself, what is the scale of the contract? What is the nature of the relationship, and how did that start? How did you mobilize and deliver that contract? How have you had any key challenges, and how have you learned from them? And summarize the results as well and try and quantify that. So what were the results of any past work you've done? Did you finish on time and within budget? And was that contract then renewed or extended? The ITT section, so this is the kind of main bulk of any tender submission. And this is where really sort of knowing how to write a tender comes into focus, because this is where you'll ultimately say this is what you will do. Typically, questions within this section would cover your approach and methodology, quality management, health and safety, and all those other points on the slide there. What I would say here is, when you're writing tenders, try and make use of past text and build upon that and learn from it. So don't start sort of every tender from scratch. And what you can do is create sort of what we call boilerplates of these kind of key areas, because then you just, to make the process as efficient as possible, you just sort of take those boilerplates and then make them specific to the tender that you're applying to at that moment in time. When you're coming to writing responses to those sections, try to deconstruct the question. So tender questions are often made up of several key points, which a buyer will want you to address, with marks distributed equally across each section. Keep the scoring matrix to hand, because when you're actually writing your response, you can use what they're actually looking for, and try and sort of drop those key points into your responses, which will make the evaluator's life easier, which is what you ultimately want to do. To maximize your marks, you should always deconstruct the question in such a way that all points are addressed, which sounds quite obvious, but it's amazing how quickly you can go off on a tangent when writing a tender. So being very focused on what they're actually specifically asking for is so critical. You can't know how to write a tender without first breaking down the individual elements of the tender questions, and that's what we'll look at here now. So for example, if the question was, please provide details of how you propose to manage your subcontractors and supply chain, including placement of orders to ensure appropriate lead times. In your response, please include details on the below. So provide 2 examples of a problem which occurred completing similar work, and how did you overcome this? And then provide 2 examples of problems you have faced with subcontractors in the past, and how did you overcome this? And it's not uncommon for tenders to have really long-winded questions like this, which does make it difficult to break down. But you can see we've kind of deconstructed those two parts. So in the bold sections, you can see mini questions. So we've got the problems which have occurred and how did you overcome this? And then problems you were faced with subcontractors, and then how did you overcome them? So if we were to look at how we might potentially structure a response to that, you could maybe have management of our subcontractors and supply chain. You can have a section on that. You could then have a section on placement of orders to ensure appropriate lead times, then have a section on problems occurring during similar work, and then have a section on problems with subcontractors. And then that specifically then addresses the question, and clearly highlights to the buyer that you've read exactly what the question is and answered it completely. Make life easier for the buyer by being as concise as you can. So depending on the tender, buyers might have hundreds of submissions to evaluate. They might only have 2 or 3. In the most recent one I did, I think there was 5 submissions and 6 submissions, and 3 were successful. But then I've known some other tenders to have tens of submissions. I suppose it depends on what area you're operating in and how popular those contracts are. But when writing your submission, consider these points here as sort of like best practice points, really, to make the tender as readable as possible. So you can use headings matched to the deconstructed parts of the question. Don't use filler or fluff content. This doesn't add anything of value and could actually frustrate the evaluator. Be to the point. If you can say something in a few words, then do it. Bullet points are your friend. I can't believe I wrote that, to be honest with you, but bullet points are your friend, and they do help break it down, make it a lot easier to read, and do try to avoid jargon. And if you work in an industry where there's lots of acronyms or abbreviations, do make sure that you use the full sentence or the full phrase first before jumping into acronyms, because you can lose people very quickly. But you still want to make sure that even when you're being concise, that your writing is coherent and makes sense and answers the question and is grammatically correct as well. Otherwise, you are in danger of leaving a negative impression on the evaluator. You know, today's day and age with Word or Google Docs or whatever kind of software you use to help the writing, there's really no excuse for those kind of typos and grammatical errors. And in a way, you're just kind of throwing points away. Avoiding filler content is something that we often come up against in our world of bid writing, because we always operate against word counts, and it's always the hardest part of what we do isn't necessarily the writing the text, it's actually getting it within the appropriate word count. So the idea of being to the point is really important. I've seen tenders where we've been limited. I've got 200 words on the slide, but I can remember one where it was only 100 words and they were asking for several points within that. And it's really tricky to condense it down. So therefore, you know, being concise is really, really important. So the example we've got here, for example, is a sort of generic statement that somebody would use about their quality. Here at ABC Limited, we're passionate about quality and strive to implement quality into all we do. I'm sure they do, but that kind of statement is a little bit, you know, pointless in a way. It's almost like a wasted sentence. And if that sentence was in a 200-word response, then those 19 words are 10% of your response, and they don't really tell you anything. Present your tender professionally. This always takes me back to my days at university, where you used to get, I think it was 5% for your presentation of a piece of work, of an essay, and it's such an easy 5% to get. So you'd want to make it look absolutely perfect. And the same goes for tender as well. So you want to try and use every trick in the book that you can to make it stand out from your competition. You know, and doing this by investing a little time and perhaps money on the design can make it look as professional as possible. I think it's a lot easier nowadays with Word or PowerPoint, because they've got all those nice design features which you can easily tap into and make the most of. And if your submission is visually impressive as well as contextually compelling, then hopefully that will pay dividends during the marking process. So including, if you can, images or infographics, that would be good. And it also helps break the text up, because when you're evaluating large documents, and it's something I do quite often, there's nothing worse than just reading big block dense text, especially when these applications could go on for 20 or 30 pages. And if you're not very comfortable with creating infographics or actually working on the design side of things, then it might be worth actually trying to engage the services of a graphic designer who could potentially give you a hand with that. Obviously, this only really comes into play if it's a free form tender, where they just say, send your tender in a Word or PDF document. Obviously, if you're filling in the online portal tenders, which sometimes you have to do, then there's not much room for design in those anyway. So once you've written your tender, let's just have a quick reflection on the importance of reviewing and proofreading. It's absolutely critical to try and allow a few days before the submission to give yourself and maybe others the chance to review and proofread the tender, if possible. So whatever the deadline is, try and set yourself a deadline of a week or so before, just to give you that end time to make sure that it's absolutely free from any grammatical errors or typos that would reflect badly on the submission. Once you've been working on a document for a number of weeks, or tenders are typically weeks, it can be difficult to see the wood from the trees, and having a fresh pair of eyes will always prove useful in identifying mistakes, contradictions, or any additional content that you may have overlooked. So if you can allow yourself a few days away from the document before going back to it, then you typically spot those mistakes very, very quickly after that, rather than trying to do it after spending 2 or 3 weeks writing the whole thing. And it's not just yourself, obviously, who can review it. So you might have a colleague, a peer or a manager, or maybe somebody in a different department, depending on the size of your organization. It might even be somebody in a different organization entirely, so long as there's nothing confidential in the tender that you don't want to disclose. Family and friends, if there's anybody within your family or friend network who've got an experience in tenders, then that could be an opportunity. There's obviously tender writing companies who you can pay to write the tender for you, or they might just do the review for you. Academics are typically well versed in writing these kind of applications, so if you've got any academics in your network, then that would be good. Or it might just be an experienced writer. But having somebody to proofread it is really, really a critical part. So do try and build that into your processes if possible. And remember that tender submissions can be submitted in a number of ways. So it could be via email or postal or upload into a procurement portal. So whichever way round it is, make sure you know what that process is, and don't leave it to the last minute, especially if it's a postal submission, because obviously you need to get it time and date stamped on arrival to make sure you get it in before the deadline. And then what happens after you've actually submitted the tender? So most tenders will disclose the date by which they intend to make a decision. So obviously make a note of that in your diary so you know when to expect it. And if that date elapses, then don't be afraid to chase for an answer. Although in my experience, tender contractors are pretty good at informing you if there's any change of date. Result letters will come by the portal if you've used a portal to submit, or via an email typically. So when that deadline's approaching, keep an eye out in your junk, clutter or spam, just in case they're asking you for further information or clarification. And then hopefully, obviously, you'll have been successful with your submission. In terms of following up on the result, the follow-up process is very important, irrespective of whether you've been successful or not. It's important to know which areas of the bid you performed well in and which areas of the bid you were weaker in. And trying to obtain that feedback from the contractor is key. I've got mixed experiences of this where they've said that they would provide feedback, but they haven't, and I've had to sort of chase it down. But it's always, I think, been a worthwhile exercise, because although it's not nice to be criticised and you tend to disagree with every negative comment within the evaluation, sometimes you've just got to take it on the chin. But the main thing is that you try to learn from it, and not to repeat the same mistakes in a follow-up submission. And that is pretty much everything that I had to go through in the session. I hope you found it useful. So thank you and good luck. We'll open for some questions and answers now if anybody's got any. But if you wanted to get in touch following the session, then here's our contact details. We recently moved into the new Spark Innovation Centre last week on Mainday Road. So if you happen to be around the Cathays area in Cardiff at any time, do feel free to drop by. Or alternatively, there's phone numbers and email and website there as well. So feel free to get in touch. But Lisa, did you want to open up the Q&A?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dayne. Lots of information to take on board there. Does anybody want to come off their mic and ask Dayne a question while you've got him here now?
I've sent everybody to sleep.
Hi, Dayne, all right?
There we go.
Hi, Bio.
Hi. For startups, do you have to write grant proposals? Can you assist with that as a business? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the entire mission of Regnite is to help SMEs and startups access grant funding. Obviously, there's a lot of variables to that, and we need to run through some criteria with you to kind of see what stage of development you're at. Where are you at with your team, IP? So we can't just support anybody. We find that companies at a certain stage of development are more prone to it, but happy to have a chat with you after the call if that would help, and have those discussions and see what might be available for you. Yeah, no problem.
Do you charge for that, or how do you?
We do have a mixed model charging system, yeah, where we have a fee for the writing work, and then a success fee if the grant is successful. I think everyone in the room is based in Wales, so we're quite fortunate here. There are 2 grants available to support a percentage of our upfront fees. One is the CRISP fund run by Welsh Government, which can support applications to UK-based funding bodies. And the second one is the SCORE fund, which is administrated by WEFO, the Welsh European Funding Office, and that is to support applications to Horizon Europe. So if you locate a funding stream within Innovate UK or Horizon Europe, then we can apply to those Welsh Government or WEFO funds to support our bid writing costs. So
they will raise a voucher for you, and then you then write the proposal.
That's correct.
Do you actually write the proposal before the voucher, or you write the proposal, then you get your voucher payment later? Does it work?
No, you can't. With the SCORE and the CRISP funds, you have to have those signed off by Welsh Government or WEFO before we can start the work. And then we do the work, deliver the application, and then you would submit a form into Welsh Government or WEFO to get reimbursed.
How long does it take for you to write a proposal then?
It depends on the competition. Typically for an Innovate UK application, we say somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks, depending on how many partners are involved in the bid. Horizon Europe, there's so many different programs in it. It would be difficult to say exactly, but again, depending on the partners, we would say somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks.
Okay. I would like to speak to you afterward. Thank you.
Yeah, drop me an email and we'll get a call set up for later in the week or next week sometime. Yeah.
Okay then. Thank you.
No problem.
Anyone else like to ask a question or comment? Oh, we've got a hand up. I can't see Kieran.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Dayne. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of echo kind of the previous question, really. So, yeah, thanks for the presentation. What I'll probably do is send you an email over kind of following, just to see if we can kind of tap into some of those sources that you were just speaking about. But I just wanted to kind of show my face so you knew who I was when I emailed you.
Nice to meet you, Kieran. Yeah, drop us an email and we'll get a call set up.
All right, thanks.
No problems.
Okay, anyone else? I think you've covered everything in there. Again, as Dayne has said, if you get off the call and you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, then you can contact Dayne then direct through email.
Yeah, Lisa, I don't know if I don't know what the standard process is, but I'm happy for the slides to be shared if people want them. Yeah,
Fabulous. There's always a bargaining tool that I have. They can have the slides if they fill in their AG3s and send them back to me. So I don't mind doing that. I'll send those out, and then yeah, if you want to send them through to me on PDF format, then anyone they request, and then I can send them out to them once they sign their AG3.
I'll do it when we finish.
Fab. Danielle, you've come off your microphone. Did you want to ask a question?
No questions. Just wanted to say thank you. Very good presentation and quite useful. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Danielle. Thank you very much.
I think that's it for you now then, Dayne. You can go and grab yourself a coffee or something to eat. Work yourself hard for the last hour. Again, if anybody thinks of anything they wish they'd asked, then just contact us and or direct through to Dayne as well. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Thanks, and thanks, Dayne, for giving up your time for us today as well.
No, that's no problem. Thank you very much to everybody for attending. Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.